Okay, so thanks everybody for thanks the panelists for agreeing to sit at the hot table, and for to all of you for coming. So maybe let's begin by each of the panelists briefly introducing themselves. Maybe we start from the right-hand side. So if you could start, please.
Hi, my name is Idit Cohen. I'm a researcher at Google Research. I've been in industry in different labs for like 30 years. I worked on algorithms, networking, big data, sketching and sampling, now privacy and other things.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ce. I'm an associate professor at U Chicago, and also we are building this company called Together. Yeah, so my research focuses on machine learning systems, distributed learning, speeding up inference. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Hamad Hassani from the University of Pennsylvania. I'm an associate professor in EE, CS, and Stats. I used to do a lot of information theory when I was younger. Then I moved to machine learning. Now I do robust machine learning, safety, LLM safety, some of the stuff that Yaron talked about, as well as distributed optimization, which is the area that Say is very interested in, and like different types of things I do.
Hey, I'm Yaron. I'm CEO right now of Robust Intelligence that I talked about earlier. And before that, I was a faculty at Harvard. I used to work on some robust machine learning, but like mainly kind of theoretical computer science, algorithms optimization, game theory, networks, things like that.
I'm Julian. I'm a professor here at UCSD for the last 10 years or so. I work on various things in machine learning. I guess a lot of conversational agents and personalization. Also some things like music synthesis. I don't really work on anything related to AI safety, but Barna asked me who here does, and I couldn't really think of anyone, so I said I'd do the thing. But hopefully I'll have something to say. Oh, that's in the future, though. I haven't written it yet.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ion Stoica. I am a professor at ECS at the University of California, Berkeley. I've been also co-founder of Databricks and Anyskill. And I'm working right now the intersection between AI systems, cloud computing.
Yeah, and I'm Sujay Sanghvi. I'm a professor at UT Austin, and I also spent some time at Amazon. Okay, yeah, so this is a panel on AI safety, which I personally, find to be, I know I'm the moderator, but I personally find it to be like a very vague and ill-defined term, and it to cover a very broad scope. So I thought I'd narrow down the scope a little bit to say that, to first of all clarify that we're not talking about, let me just say like AI systems that control things in the real world. So we're not really talking about self-driving cars or like killer robots and all that stuff where it's clearly there are a lot of ethical and so on issues with AI safety, but more of just, kind of more pedestrian, not pedestrian, but let's just say like generative AI in the context of, language models, vision models, more of the kind of stuff that maybe we actually do research on, as opposed to like, drones and stuff like that. Okay. So with that, maybe preamble, I'll ask the panel, and you can go in any self-chosen order you want, to briefly share an anecdote of, AI, as I just, kind of refined it, being a problem, or like, what is one example which really highlighted to you that there's a safety issue, in the context of just like generative models for language and vision?
I've made a few recipes recently where I realized at some point while making it that the recipe was clearly not written by a human. because what I made did not taste like it was made by a human. That didn't used to be a problem, but it is very hard to trust a lot of those online generated content. I mean, I think the anecdote is a bit silly, but it sort of does speak to the mistrust there is in a lot of online content and doubt that it really is generated by humans. And, you know, just an erosion of the quality of the kind of content we find through search engines. I may just be a bad cook though. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, I mean, for me, so one issue is what Yaron actually talked about, which is jailbreaking or extracting content from these LLMs that's harmful, illegal, or toxic. For example, it can be harmful language. It could be copyrighted material. It could be private information, and so on and so forth. Now, Sujay mentioned that this is just confined to right now to LLMs, text-based LLMs, and so on. But the challenge or the issue goes much beyond that when these LLMs are used in the physical world or in actions. And so we actually have a work coming up soon. In a few days, it will be online, where we attack, jailbreak these kind of LLM-based robots. And they can do all sorts of things. And that's a real challenge or issue, safety issue that I'm excited about.
What's an example of such a thing?
So there are robots.
No, like
Example of what?
just like, which
So
in the context of generated text or generated images. Yeah, like
Mhm.
yes, like if you have a robot, it can have like a serious. It's pretty serious, or a self-driving car,
Right.
right? But I guess my question is, you
So
know,
copyrighted material. So extracting copyrighted material, that's an issue. I think Yaron briefly mentioned it at the
Yeah.
end of his talk.
Mhm.
So if you could break these kind of LLM to extract their training data, the data that they use to, they have been used in training, that's a serious issue because you can extract, for example, a copy of a Harry Potter novel or a New York Times article or all sorts of other copyrighted material, or somebody's credit card information could even be extracted.
Okay.
So I think I'll not necessarily answer your question because because I think that at least I haven't heard about new kind of attacks you couldn't do before. You can lower the barrier, but if you are talking about, you know, extracting copyright materials, it's like deepfakes, everything. You could do it before, right? I'm not aware about this kind of marginal risk, things which you can do with LLM you couldn't do before. But it's true that it's like the barrier is much lower, so more people can do that, right? So maybe one thing is also about kind of trying to find and be defenses. This is happen with every technology, with internet, right? With internet, a lot of other attacks which are done could be done before, but they didn't have that scope, which is provided by the internet. You know, it was a difference between being much more prevalent, like more, you know, the effects being bigger, right? Like worms or things like that. But one thing I want to mention, I think it's also the challenge is because, you know, the interaction with humans. And I was listening a few days ago, or maybe 1 week ago, at a panel by people, you know, some CEO of the companies which build agents, okay? So, and one thing they mention is like, and I think it makes sense in retrospect, the humans is like, they tend, you have this kind of, this bimodal reaction, or you either believe everything or you don't believe anything. Right? It's like even the trust is like, it's a little bit more trustful and less trustful. It's like, it's pretty binary. You trust or you don't trust, because this is kind of the limit, the least energy you are going to put. It's like, you trust everything, easy. You don't trust anything, easy, right? In the between, it's when you need to put a lot of work, right? And we know that humans, like we want to minimize the energy we are putting in whatever we are doing. So I think this is what the problem is, one of the challenge, right? It's like you trust everything, get all this hallucination and get all of these things. You don't trust anything, and there are people who don't trust. Then we have a problem as a community about building these AI agents. That's kind of where I think it is. But because fundamentally the answer is very easy, right? You have to verify, right? If you want to do programmatically. Now today, all these AI applications, which have success, they have a human in the loop. Because the prompt is ambiguous kind of level, the human has a context which is not externalized, so it kind of can verify. You can verify your recipe, right? You verify that it's not good or whatever, right? But if you don't want to do it programmatically, if you want to do it programmatically, you need to have some kind, like we know, right? More precise specification and so forth. You need to verify, to have something to verify against it. So I think it's at the end of the day, I don't think that kind of new elements. There are things about you need to consider about the human interaction with this kind of LLMs, which can create problems. And at the end of the day, if you want automated decision making and things like that, which we want, I don't see another way than it's good old engineering principles applying them.
I've been waiting for a long time to say this, Jan. I disagree with you.
Okay, good. More interesting.
Yes, no, I mean, like I'm so happy that that I can say that. And the reason I disagree, I disagree about there not being new elements. I think, well, I guess it depends on kind of like what we're calling new elements, but like, even if, I gave an example, like in the talk, for example, something as simple as like, putting executable code in pickle files, right? So I maybe kind of taking a step back, the title of what I'm about to say is that like, I think that, perhaps there are kind of like, I don't know if we call them new elements, but the surface area, that we're, the surface area of risk that we're introducing when we're bringing in, large language models, it, just grows exponentially, right? So, a simple example, like, the kind of model backdoor, right? So from a, security standards, like pickle files are just, you just don't allow pickle files because they have, these, because they require this sort of deserialization. But, in using large language models, people don't have a choice and they have to store, files in this format. And now, there's a new attack vector because like basically those files are not, they're not scanned at that level. So even something as simple as that, right? It just sort of exposes just like massive risk into organizations, right? All this kind of like these other things about data exfiltration and all these kinds of things, again, but listen, we would be out of business, right? Literally, if what you were saying is true, we're not, right? And I think in a very strong way, we're not out of business, right? So I think kind of the security that right now the standard security measures that we have for software just simply do not apply to AI. I think it's we can't be just can't be more blunt than that. Now I think kind of moreover, right? We're talking about agents, and we also know some people that have are running kind of companies that the kind of like build agents. We have to understand that like that risk literally exponentiates, right, when we're introducing agents, right? And I think so. To me, kind of like and that's huge. That's massive. And I think kind of so yeah. So I think kind of I think that these are kind of like new risk vectors. The last thing is I think more specifically like when we're looking at LLMs, I think something that is unique with LLMs is that they're both they combine the machine learning aspect of it and the operating system aspect of it. And then what that does is it means that you can now kind of leverage kind of adversarial attacks or machine learning vulnerabilities to sort of basically to now kind of manipulate instructions, right, that of the LLM, right? And that's something that that's something that normally you cannot do, and I think that's very powerful. So that's just kind of my take on it.
No, look, I want to give other people opportunity to do it, but I'm not sure what the disagreement is. I said that it's going to make some of the attacks much worse. I think the last one I want to understand better because you say the kind of is unique, but this also happened with the internet, right? And the security industry, you know, strived for a long time with the internet, right? For 20 years, 30 years or whatever. So yes, the attacks will become much worse. Yes, we are going to, is what I said, you know, focus to new techniques to detect these attacks, to, you know, quicker and so forth. But it's not, you know, like there is, I don't see existential risk or things like that. It's like this fundamental, at least, of course, you can say, oh, it's going to, you know, attack grid, you know, or something like that. But this is possible today. Sure. It's possible before LLMs. It's going to be, you know, it's going to just lower the barrier, right? That's kind of what I'm saying, right? Everything is like, it's like assistants, like humans, right? Like humans can do that, which is smart enough. Now you have a lot of more equivalents which can do bad things. Right.
Any of the other panelists want to say something?
Yeah, so I'm not really expert on AI safety. So my personal experience, that like the moment I realized AI safety is very important is when I was playing with Devin from Cognition, right? So you input up, like build the app to do this, right? Start to build the app on its own. And sometimes they do the interaction, ask me, what is your GitHub token? I was like, you are not getting that, right? So that's the moment I kind of realized it can do a lot of things that I have no idea what it's doing. So we start to transition from a phase that even like install a package on, like in Linux, you need to just answer yes or no to actually make a change, to something just like interact with all my account and just do stuff, right? So, and that's the moment I kind of feel AI safety kind of define how much power we are going to give to each of those agents, right? So kind of define this trust boundary between human and also the language model. So I don't know how to make out, or like what to make out of that, but that's the moment I feel, yeah, it's a really important problem.
Yeah. 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 I had a similar such a realization, and it also kind of speaks to you know, what Jan was mentioning, of like something that can be done with generative AI, but you know, was actually not possible to do before, right? Which is in the Indian election, there was a particular politician, not the prime minister, but one of the other politicians, you know, who used this company called Indian Deepfaker. Okay, that's the name of the company. Okay, and it's a unicorn. Okay, and what that company does is it makes personalized deepfakes that are approved by you, right? So you are its customer. It'll make personalized deepfakes where, you know, it's like you have an estimate of, you know, I'm a politician, I have an estimate of, you know, what interests each person, and it'll make me talk to that issue and send it as a WhatsApp video to that person, right? So there are things, I think, you know, which are materially different in the modern world, which cannot be, you could not do personalization at scale, and, you know, you cannot erode the shared experience.
Yeah, I think the personalization scale is one thing, but again, but fundamentally deepfake is forever, right?
Of course,
right?
yes.
It's like impersonating
forever,
someone else to getting some gain, right? It's like from antiquity. Right?
No, absolutely.
So,
yeah,
but you know, personalization and so forth is like, so I think we agree. I think things become much worse. Again, like the internet, many attacks became much more worse, right? And you know, and I think that the other, you know, that what was mentioning, I think it's about the interaction between the humans and these large language models, right? Because we are emotional and things like that. And this is where problems can occur, right? There is no emotional bond between you and Linux, right? Or maybe, but it's much easier to be fooled by these large language models, right? Yes.
Yeah, there is an emotional bond. It's when it doesn't work, I get very emotional. Yeah, okay. Let's see. So I had one or two more prepared questions, but I also want to take some questions from the audience maybe after that. One of them is, okay, so the current approach to, you know, like at least in the context of these like large generative models, whether it's images or language, right, is to just first train on everything, right? And it makes it potentially unsafe or whatever, right? And then kind of fix it later, right? Like fix it in post and try to, do the best you can, right? And clearly that has issues. I mean, we had a talk today, we had several examples now. But is there any viable alternative option, right? Like, which doesn't meaningfully give up on accuracy? Or are we just stuck with, like, let's patch it up later as the only mode of operation for safety?
Well, I'm not aware of any solution during training, because at least in academia, but industry doesn't tell us what they are doing. And in academia, you cannot really train these large models. So all the solutions that I have seen are post-training, like in fine tuning and so on. But it's known now. And also Yaron mentioned that when you fine tune, you have to compromise with respect to accuracy or informativeness if you want to get safety. And if you improve accuracy, you would compromise in terms of safety. So there is this trade-off in fine tuning that people are talking about. But I mean, I think many people believe that the solution is in the training. So when you train, you have to do safety training, or there should be kind of safety constraints that have to be somehow enforced, somehow maybe safety regulations or safety constraints. But beyond that, I don't think, and people are still doing research on that.
So there are clear things you can do right on the training. I mean, people talking about, and this is what we do as humans, right? It's like, for instance, you don't, there are not classes about how to make bombs or kill people or things like that. We don't teach people. Right? Of course, you can find that information, but we don't teach them. So obviously, you can do similar things, at least to alleviate the problem with these models, right? The problem, the thing is that these kind of things are not scalable, right? It's like, because you need someone to curate that content, right? That's kind of the issue.
Yeah.
But obviously you can do something, better. And like you said, it's like, if you don't learn something, it's easier than unlearning it, right? Is what basically they do.
I think this has
So,
been
yeah.
demonstrated at small scale, with like models, like smaller models like Phi 3 trained on like fully synthetic data, right? So that's an example where, at least they claim they, tried to avoid harmful.
Yeah, the problem is that synthetic data is good for different some domains, but for things like our factual question and so forth, it's not good. There is no synthetic data to replace, the real data, the factual data. But yeah.
I guess I would say, the situation where you have to train on all of your data and you just can't afford to throw any of it out because it hurts performance and it costs millions of dollars to train the models is probably a temporary situation. And, actually cleaning up data sets would be viable were we not subject to those requirements. And I think at least in specific domains like music, where there are all of these issues about copyrighted music being used in training data, and the sizes of the models and the training sets are maybe not quite what we're contending with in text. It is sort of, there are certainly people who are training models on copyright-free data sets as a means of correcting these issues rather than correcting them post hoc, which will probably be the same situation that eventually happens in language models. I think we're maybe at a slightly weird period of naissance right now, where it's, things are a certain way that won't persist forever.
Anybody else? Okay. I have one final question. Oh yeah, sorry, please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so like, I feel the capacity and also safety, I don't think they can be completely coupled, right? So for example, like we see some of our users using language model to build a chatbot. How they enforce safety is they have this very long system prompt. Like, you are a bot, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, your culture is aligned with this, aligned with that, right? So if you use the chatbot in that way, if during pre-training the bot don't know, right, how to interpret those rules, and if the bot is not good at following instructions, you might end up having something that actually not as safe as a model actually sees more things, right? So I think this like capacity and the safety, how to navigate the trade-off, I think is very interesting. So like personally, I feel AI safety is a very hard problem. I think the hard problem is fundamentally is a big system problem that have many, many components, right? So there's also the guardrail, right? So that many components of the system can robustly enforce safety. I think challenging problem doesn't always require a single technical solution. It's always like a whole bunch of solutions come together. So personally, I feel the more capable the model is, the more easier it is for you to align that to certain culture, align that to certain definition of safety, and also interact with the rest of the system to make the whole system much safer. So that's my personal feeling.
Okay. I have a final question among my prepared questions. And you know, that has to do with legislation, right? So to kind of draw an analogy, you know, like I think all of us, since maybe the birth of the internet, or at least, you know, the last 2 decades, you know, claim that our online privacy is super important, and you know, like it should not be violated. They shouldn't use our data, yada yada, and like nobody does anything about it, right? Like essentially have no privacy, right? And we have totally given that up in the interest of accuracy, or whatever you want to call it, like quality of service, right? And so, is AI safety heading in that direction? I guess that's my, you know, like that's the background. And kind of the more specific question is, do we need legislation right now that mandates quote unquote AI safety? And I don't really know what that means, but you know, does the panel have any opinions on, you know, whether there should even be any legislation, or what should it look like? Or should the tech companies just police themselves because they have, I guess, reputation to lose, but maybe they don't? I don't know. So
I do have pretty strong opinions here, and especially with this SB 1047 from California. I think that at least the legislation, the way it's pursued today, it's wrong. I think that this kind of, like, for instance, because now the main way to legislate is basically on number of flops, or to put the limits about how, you know, how much it ranges to cost, or how much it ranges to fine tune. And then the other aspect is that they try to put the liability, at least in California's bill, on the developers of the model, right? And I think there are a few aspects here which are, you know, wrong. It's like putting the limits in order to build safer systems is something kind of unique. In every other industry, it typically costs a lot of more money and resources to build safety, right? Think about safer cars, or think about airplanes. You know, you have this Boeing stuff, you know, you have the article, they cut the cost, right? They cut corners, reduce the cost, because it's very, and because they try to equate, say, oh, it's a model is dumb, it's safe. If it's smart, it's unsafe. This is ridiculous, right? If you think about the chip in the smart bomb is much dumber than the chip in this iPhone, right? So I think that's kind of one aspect. And the other aspect is obviously putting the liability of such general technology on the builder of the technology. It's also very dangerous. You need always, if you want to regulate, the applications, right, of that technology, right? Right?
I mean, maybe not, right? Like, you know, if I make an unsafe firearm, you know, the liabilities may be on me, right? So
sure. I mean, there are always exceptions, but you cannot, you know, like the same thing is like, because if you think about like the analogy with the chips, how I'm going to keep you liable as a chip about, you know, are you going to be liable that I'm going to use a chip in a bomb, right? For instance, right? I'm taking as extreme, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So, so I think that's kind of my view. So I think that if you want, you know, like I think you don't need at this stage probably lots of regulation. What you need is to study these models, is to study about, to develop the benchmarks, safety benchmarks, things like that. And then if there are these benchmarks, actually everyone will use them to evaluate their models, because if they don't use it, third parties can use to evaluate your model. So I think it should be a lot of more investments from the government and so forth in AI, in LLM to facilitate these studies. So basically, if you want regulation, you need to be anchored in some kind of scientific understanding about what the dangers are and what you want to preclude. And again, you already have, for a lot of application of those, there are all the regulation in place. So enforce them or improve them.
So I think on that, I think there's a difference between regulation and standards, right? And one can ask, well, should we have regulations, which means like laws, and then should we have standards, which is not these are not laws, but these are standards that institutes kind of can create, and then organizations can choose whether or not to adhere to these standards. And personally, and obviously I'm biased, but I personally think that both are required. So on the standards piece, I think that it is very important that there are experts that including academics, right? Like very importantly, academics that create standards for the people, the large enterprises or their can basically look at and are easily kind of like enforceable to sort of like decide whether or not their organization is following these standards, basically knowing that they've done the the bare minimum to to protect their their customers, their organization, their employees, what have you, right, from various risks. And that's not unique to AI. This is like we do it in software, we do it basically with anything. On the regulation piece, this is where I also think personally that that is required. Now, I'm not sure that like the California law, I'm not sure that they put I'm not sure that it's a correct description that it puts the onus on the developers. I believe that it's on the model manufacturers. I don't know that it's on the individual developers. They're developing the model.
But in open source, you are going to be
if you're part of Meta, then Meta is responsible. So, but now we can argue whether the existing regulation,
if you are fine tuning and more than 10 million is an existing model, and you can do that. Many companies do that and so forth. And
companies,
but
not individuals.
But you are going to hurt and disproportionately the small companies.
I'm not sure that that's true either, because like the small companies, first of all, we can argue whether whether this applies to small companies, but again, it doesn't put the onus on the the individuals. It puts the onus on the companies, large companies, small companies. We can debate how large or small a company needs to be to fine tune however many the law says, but it's on companies. Now the other part is like but we can also argue about whether this existing law proposal, whether we like it, whether we think it needs to be different, but like there's a existentially, like, should there these laws exist? And for me, just like by power of analogy, I think that they do, right? And just when I think about vehicles, right? Well, vehicles are tools, and they could be used for good, they could be used for bad, and we put brakes on vehicles.
May I ask you a follow-up question? Since you are pro, like, what in your mind would be one example of a well-crafted small regulation in a very small
Not my
domain?
job.
Not your job.
No, literally, it's not my job. I can
no, because I mean, I just I didn't mean to
I
put you on the spot,
agree
but
with
it's
you.
just
Like,
that
to me, whenever I see limits on the cost, like kind of the number of parameters of a model, or kind of the cost of training all these things, to me, like, and I think probably to a lot of people here, I don't want to say they're garbage, because that's going to be just like too aggressive, but they don't make sense, okay? Or and the reason is because, like, we know that technology advances like very, very, very rapidly, right? And so they're kind of vacuous, right? So I don't know that like kind of this particular proposal is the right one, but fundamentally, should there be laws? I personally believe that there should.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it's like one of the arguments I've heard is We just don't know how to regulate it, so we should not, right? And
That I don't agree
like, I
with,
think we can
but,
all agree that
you
there
know,
is some bad regulations.
I mean, that's, sorry, that to me is a ridiculous.
No, it's not my
argument,
argument. This is something I heard.
But that's a ridiculous argument. Like, you know,
But then how you are going to
it doesn't
regulate?
make any sorry,
Yeah,
it
but-
also just doesn't make any logical sense.
No,
right?
but then on the other hand, there are no
You know-
positive examples of good regulations.
At all in the world.
That's what I'm asking. Have you heard of?
I mean, I
Any-
think
anyway,
people
sorry.
are happy with seatbelts. I think people are happy with car brakes.
Yes.
Right. I think people are
In
happy
the
with some
context-
limitations
in
on
the context of
firearms.
AI.
Right. Like maybe some people would like more limitations on firearms. Right. So, I mean, I think that like I'm saying that, you know, we don't know how to perfectly regulate something means that we shouldn't regulate it
Yeah,
is
it's very hard.
ridiculous.
It's very hard to regulate something you don't really understand, because this is a technology which forget. Let's
I-
not no, no. Let me
Sure.
finish. Let's not forget is going to, you know, here we are focusing on the negative aspect, but it's a huge positive aspect of the technology as well. And regulation, which inherently are going to hurt the positive as well. So that's kind of what is hard, right?
Speed bumps also, you know, like speed bumps also, interfere with, with positives. Right, but you know, but I don't like speed bumps, like, but I still think that they're a good thing.
Were designed long time after cars were invented, after roads and everything, when the problems were well understood.
Yes, but the
and
rate,
there are studies
Jan, but the
that-
rate, but the rate of, but also the rate of development here, you know, is exponentially faster than I think that the
But
rate of car
fundamental
development.
things here we are arguing whether you are going to regulate after you understand the dangers or before you understand the dangers. And basically the examples about the speed bumps, it's about after you understand the dangers. I'm not saying you shouldn't regulate after you understand the impacts, the negative impact. I'm always user. What I'm arguing is that regulating before you understand, and while they end up regulating before you understand because they don't have other kind of good proxy metrics to regulate, they are regulating on what they do. Like you say, it is vacuous, sessions.
So, so when I think about this, I think, you know, will we know more about the dangers of AI in 5 years? Absolutely. Will we know more in 10 years? Absolutely. Will we more in 20 years? Yes. You know, will we know more in 100 years? Absolutely. Right? Should we wait 100 years before we start regulating technology? I don't think so. And I think that we have, you know, right now we have some understanding of the dangers, right? We don't need to understand, you know, and I think that we don't need to understand how many layers or, you know, how to train, or, you know, we don't need to have to know like what is attention, right? And I think that people can regulate according to the outcome.
But
So-
what do you regulate now, for instance? Because again, like we discussed early on, a lot
We
of
can have a separate offline conversation about like exactly like what do we think is a better proposal, and we can go and, you know, and we can lobby for that. But, you know, if we're asking the question, should there be?
No, I'm not
regulation?
asking that question. I'm asking a question of
The question was
Yeah,
about
the question is-
the current regulations.
what? No, not even the current one. That seems bogus to me also. But, you know, it is useful to have a specific positive thought. Like this is a yada, yada, yada is a regulation I can get behind. Right? And I think the problem
I'll
is
give an
that
example,
doesn't
right?
exist.
Like, look, I
Yeah.
mean, like I have my criticisms about, you know, about the existing, democratic system that we, you know, maybe that we have in this country, maybe in other countries. It doesn't mean that I believe in anarchy.
No, of course. Yeah. But
But
in the context of AI,
isn't
there's
that
a
what we're
specific-
saying?
Yeah. Okay. Is there anybody else want to talk? Because I
Yeah.
want to open it up to the audience for
Maybe
questions.
return to the prompt a bit. I mean, I think of all the examples we've heard, I think privacy is not the correct analogy. Speed bumps are a more correct analogy. Guns, I don't know. But I think the difference with AI safety is it does have that more like tragedy of the commons element. You know, I want my data to be safe. I would probably like it if my own car had a seat belt. I like to use it. So these things are kind of fairly well incentive aligned. The person using the system wants them. Whereas with AI safety, you know, I don't want you making deep fake porn or learning how to make drugs out of kitchen cleaners or whatever. But, you know, I want to do that stuff. I never want the AI to, I never want it to say no to me. Every guardrail or limitation is an annoyance to the user. So no one individually wants these guardrails on AI. So it's like, that's the classic sort of tragedy of the commons scenario, which, you know, privacy is not, I don't think. So in that way, it's quite different. And I think it's sort of the tragedy of the commons situation, you know, that's, you know, arguably essentially what you need governments or regulation to mandate, because it's not aligned with individual incentives. But, you know, I have no suggestions what the regulation should be.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. Anybody else? About AI legislation?
I think if we wait for a couple of years, so LLMs came out around a year ago. Well, I mean, became very commercial around a year ago. People have started using it. If we wait for a couple of years, and this risks will be much more apparent. And then we can think about legislation or rules and so on. But it will be soon, I feel, that we need.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to open it to the audience. If anybody, okay. So him and then Arya, go for it.
Wanted to ask, is there a certain aspect of AI that are quantifiable, like what you are talking about, like adversarial attacks on privacy, where you can have engineering solutions. But then there are certain aspects that are very blurry to begin with, that have to do with ethics. For example, music or art, could you even use AI to create them, because that can often be a damage. So, and I think even in the future, like going for many years, we will not have consensus so that we can make regulations around those. Because there is no like free speech versus information and so on. I don't think we will have an agreement for a very long time. We all started to think very alike, right? So, and those issues are becoming very common because, like, you know, misinformation at scale, like anyone can do. I can make something. Previously, using previous tech, it would take 2 years to do something that I can now. So I think that's a real issue, and we want to be like, that's something sort of bypass, because we are all computer scientists and engineers over here. When there is this other aspect, they're definitely. And if, I don't know if it is a question or not, but if you guys have any comments.
You should definitely use AI to make art, sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a controversial opinion.
I guess maybe what's controversial is AI generated art putting human artists out of a job. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's, you know, also, I mean, all of these problems that we're talking about, they all have some version of them that existed in antiquity. You know, people worried about, I guess the camera put portrait artists out of a job. But it's not so sort of, it changed the nature of that kind of work, right? It also created it lowered the barrier to entry by a ton and created this whole new sector of work. It probably displaced a number of low-skilled portrait artists, and high-skilled ones kept their job, and it created loads of new jobs for people who are operating a camera, and, you know, it created a whole new industry. So it's like, oh, it's hard to really say whether it was net beneficial or not. And things like AI generated art are, I think, certainly in the same category, where you can say, well, okay, it will take some value away from a small number of artists, but it will also create will democratize art, if you like. It will create all kinds of new kinds of art. It will mean there's art and music in places where it wasn't before, and new jobs are created because of it. So yeah, I think it's really, it's unclear whether, I think it's unclear whether it will be net beneficial, and it's also unclear whether you should, you know, take the elitist opinion in the first place that, like, art should be the domain of only the highest experts and sort of not available to everyone else. You know, I think also a lot of the value currently being captured by artists is not going to artists anyway. So that will be displaced in other ways. Yeah, pretty hard to say what's going to happen, but I wouldn't be too pessimistic about it.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of issues about safety, and a lot of them come down to ethics and teaching better ethics to people. And so, I think the worst example is in politics, where none of us know what the truth is. But I spent 5 years helping people get elected, and I learned a lot about the ethics of politics. And it's shocking. It's a lot worse than, building software that people uses wrongly. But the first politician I went to, I asked him, can we put your message online? Tell the world what your message is. And he shut the door and he said, I can't talk about that in public. But the last thing you want to do is tell the truth about what your belief is. Your job to get elected is to tell them what they believe. And and then a second time I was building automated robots that could think on their own and do things on their own. And I was working with a brilliant Russian scientist who was brought into the US through the CIA. We wanted him for some reason, his brilliance. And I explained, shouldn't we put a heart in the robots so they could think like a human? And he said, first of all, we don't have religion in Russia. We've never been trained in religion. We don't have a heart. I'm not trying to be negative to that culture, but everyone's slightly different or very different. So, the ethics part of it is partly, you guys are thinking about the software part. I'm saying there's a cultural part, and I'm not sure we've done everything we could on that.
Yep. Anybody have any thoughts about it?
I think that's a very good comment. Actually, something from our Harvard days. One of the faculty members, at Harvard. So what she did is actually she kind of had ethics lectures embedded within CS courses, and I thought that was a very good way kind of doing it. At the time it was junior faculty, and I thought, okay, this is great. This is like one lesson less that I have to teach. So, that's great. So like, I think, kind of small-minded lecturers like, my previous self were incentivized to do it. But it worked out like really, really nicely. So, what happened was, so basically we brought in philosophy grad students, and then they kind of connected with material of the of the course, and then kind of they came in to do one lecture about ethics, and I think it had a great effect. It basically had kind of students like in computer science thinking about kind of like the ethics around what they're doing, and I think it's something that it's an example of something that to me is like relatively low effort from a organizational perspective, but I think it has like a a long-lasting impact on the students and ultimately the faculty as well. So I thought that was kind of a great way to get started. There are probably kind of like more things that need to get done, obviously, but I think this is it was a good mechanism.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Do you want the mic?
Yeah, specifically for the founders on the panel, I'm interested in how you sort of think about these industry approaches to, safe AI, specifically these companies, for example, Ilya today raising like pre-product at a $5 billion valuation. Do you think that sort of strategy of like intense capital accumulation, like in pursuit of this like nominal goal of safe AI is sort of the right way to approach this?
Something I can tell you that is actually interesting is that like in this when you're going through an acquisition process, then there's there's a lot of legal work that you have to go through, and then then part of the legal work is about your technology and kind of the standards and whatnot, and then sort of we're kind of like going through this you know, through all this, and it's like very mundane until they get to the lawyers get to this part about, you know, they ask us, do you use AI in your, you know, in your products? And we're like, well, of course we do, right? And then they go off about, you know, sort of like, you know, what sort of things have you done for like kind of, you know, AI security, safety, blah, 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 blah. You know, it's like, oh my God, this is, you know, so now it's sort of like, you know, become a kind of almost like kind of a legal standard, you know, as you go through these types of transactions, you know, so now it's like through an M&A process, I'm assuming that now it's like also through fundraising processes. So there's a kind of, you definitely need to sort of now do something to check off that box. You know, in the same way they need to do for software, you know, safety, software security, you also need to do that now for like kind of AI security, AI safety. So like with the intense kind of capital and kind of and everything that, you know, happening kind of through AI, I think my guess is that every AI company that will want to raise its next round will also have to, you know, somehow like be able to, you know, give a proper answer and kind of documentation and, you know, the processes that they've gone through to basically deploy AI securely. So just advice for, you know, for anybody who's started a company or thinking about starting a company.
Yeah.
It's not entirely obvious when we get our understanding about AI safety is growing that much, because if you think about it, like even like 10, 15 years ago, when people were interested about CNNs, the breakthrough journalists, people got to know that there exists this kind of distribution issue, like adversarial robustness issue. So these kind of things in the realm of AI is kind of yesterday. We knew that they exist. So to me, it more looks like that these AI safety issues are some problems that we are dragging down from one generation of machine learning model to the next generation. And just because, you know, like the machine learning applications are growing, like obviously we also care about AI safety more, but that doesn't necessarily mean that our understanding of core problems of AI safety is also getting developed over time. Yeah, I mean, like these days we're getting to know transformers more, but are we actually getting to know what is adversarial robustness more, or what is, you know, like out of distribution? Because frankly, we never solved it with CNN. So that we improved the situation, but like the core problems are still there.
Yeah, look, I mean, to me, things like kind of out of distribution or kind of like adversarial, you know, vulnerabilities, it's kind of like, you know, it's gravity, right? It's the same thing. It's like, you know, it exists, right? But, you know, what we're developing is hopefully we're preventing, you know, developing kind of like, you know, you know, sort of like safety nets or, you know, or guardrails that will, you know, like we can't stop gravity, but hopefully, you know, if we put a guardrail, then, you know, you wouldn't fall off a, you know, you wouldn't fall off a balcony, right? Or if you do fall off a balcony, then maybe there's a safety net to catch you. So again, I don't think that, you know, to me, these sort of these phenomena are sort of, you know, kind of like inherently, you know, they're intrinsic in the technology, like in kind of in statistical machine learning. So I don't think that there's like something new about that. And I agree with you. Like there's, you know, there's nothing new today than there was in 2018, than there was in, you know, in 2012, which is when, you know, one of our folks, Blaine, wrote like kind of his, you know, paper that won the Test of Time award on data poisoning. So all these things, you know, they exist, and they existed, you know, more than 10 years ago. But, you know, really it's about like, what do we do to, you know, kind of acknowledging that, you know, what do we do to kind of safeguard these systems? And that has developed. But yeah, right.
But does it make sense for us to put all of our eggs into the basket of LLMs? Because like, because we know that we weren't able to solve the problem with much simpler models like CNN.
Yeah.
You know, like
I don't think we are. I mean, I don't know who we is, right? You know, if it's the royal we or whatever, but like, but I don't think that we are. I don't think that we are putting like kind of all our eggs in the basket of LLMs. I think that like, you know, if today you can still buy a robust intelligence product that will protect you from, you know, from predictive, you know, for predictive models, for tabular, for what have you. that, you know, like against risks that are not necessary for LLMs. And then the reason, you know, and then the reason is because like there are kind of like fundamental things that fundamental vulnerabilities, and you can kind of protect against them. So I don't think it's all about LLMs.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, like many people say, you know, like you can think about these large language models like assistants, like, and there is something you can learn from the society, how it's evolved, right? It's like, you know, the humans in retrospect, we are still, you know, trying to understand, right? What drives, and there are different disciplines for that. But the way we kind of fill the gaps is kind of laws, right? It's like you have laws for, and the interesting thing about these laws are about outcomes, right? To my early point, that kind of was legal system in a society. It's about the outcomes. It's not regulate a particular individual intrinsically before doing anything, right? It doesn't regulate the potential of someone to do harm. It regulates, or the law is applies after, right? Catching you doing harm, right? That's kind of, you know, even after that, you are, you know, innocent under proven guilty, right? So that's kind of the things to think about. And you fill the gaps, right? Are you going to, can you solve the problem if you know exactly how these models are working and so forth, with the fewer laws and things like that? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that you are not going to go you know, to make some progress, trying to patch the legal system, the regulation system, if you want, on the outcomes, wherever you see the gaps, right? This is what happens, right? So I think that you're seeing a lot about that. And again, it's like, just to be very clear, my main point about regulation, about us regulating on the models themselves rather than the applications, right? That's why I'm more on the application side and the models aspect. I think there is another aspect here I just want to mention. It does turn out that, for instance, and this is another problem with this current regulation about the fine-tuning. The fine-tuning is very effective. I can fine-tune a model to do bad things with very little data. And ironically, it turns out that it's even more effective. The larger the model, the better you can fine-tune it with fewer examples, right? So.
By the way, I'll comment about that. Like actually, so we have some folks at a company that they're threat intelligence researchers. This is what they do for a living, and apparently what they've discovered is that in the kind of like over the span of the past year, the hypothesis was that, like, you know, attackers are going to go and fine tune models, and, you know, and this is the danger. But it turns out, you know, and this is like kind of from things that they do on the dark web. Like fine tuning a model is like, you know, requires like a lot of, you know, like high skill, and also, you know, a lot of compute power, right? So instead, like what attackers do is they, you know, they pass on system prompts, right? And that's really kind of like the, and then they pass and they sell kind of the system prompts on the dark web, right? And that's kind of like really their modus operandi right now, more than fine tuning. So it's the system prompts more than the fine tuning right now. That's what I hear.
Okay. Please finish.
No, so one thing I want, and you know, I know that kind of for a fact that the frontier model is about, I know this from Chabot Arena. So say there is some tasks on which the models do not perform well, okay? So what do they do? And it's very effective, it turns out. For that task, they get some high quality labeled data set and patch the model, right? And after that, it's going to perform quite well on that task, right? So that's like kind of, I mean, you know, patching is a form of fine tuning. There are many ways to do it. That's what I meant. You know.
Yeah. All right. I think we are at time. And I see the time up being flashed at me. All right. So let's thank the panelists again. And thank you all.